Okay, so my name is Sharlene Toney. I feel like I should give a little disclaimer at the beginning here because I do work for Indiana University, that everything I say tonight, they are not necessarily the feelings of the university. I did this research as a part of my MS in cybersecurity risk management at IU, not in my full-time job capacity. So I just try to kind of keep those separate, so that I don't mind this being out there. My DEF CON talk is certainly out there, but I do like for people to know that I am not in any way saying that these are the feelings of the university. So that said, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Um, I have, let's see here. Oh, interesting. Oh, there we go. Um, okay, so I have actually been um, affiliated with IU in some way, shape, or form since 1994. I came here as an undergraduate student. Um, I've been working here for the last 20 years. I have to give credit to a wonderful woman at University of Kentucky who created my little character there. We did a poster session together at EDUCAUSE, and she turned us all into little cartoon characters. But I've been working at IU for 20 years. I was an academic advisor for 8 years. And then from there, I moved into academic advising technology. So I've been working as a business analyst specifically on academic advising and student success technologies for the last 12 years. Decided that I should take advantage of the fact that I get a tuition benefit. And so went back 3 years ago to do my MS in cybersecurity risk management, which I will finish in May, thankfully, finally. But during that process, I'm not a technical person, I'm a functional analyst. And so I was trying to figure out, where do I really fit into this whole ecosystem of cybersecurity and privacy. And once I took my first cyber law class, I knew that policy was definitely where I was going to land. Um, so I've gone through, I've taken some additional law classes, health privacy law. I completed in August my CIPP US certification, and that is through the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And it's a certified information privacy professional for US privacy policy. So essentially, I'm certified in US privacy policy, and I actually just got back from the Security and Privacy Conference in Washington, D.C. last week, which was pretty interesting. So that just kind of gives you an idea of my background. This whole presentation really started as a paper that I wrote in my very first cyber law class. And I stumbled upon it. You have to forgive me, I have to keep moving the pictures of us around so that I can see my slides. Um, I had the option of writing a paper. I thought, I'm really interested in student data and how student data ends up in the hands of commercial data brokers. So that's what I was really looking for. And as I was looking for that, I came across how student data moves not only to commercial data brokers, but how it makes a stop midpoint with a nonprofit data broker, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So in 1974, you are all probably very familiar with FERPA. Originally it was intended to prevent unauthorized access and disclosure of student records. The big thing at the time is that parents wanted they wanted to be able to give consent for any of their students' records to be shared with anyone else. And so the records essentially became property of the parents until the student went to college. And then once they became a full-time enrolled college student, then those educational records became property of the student. And it stayed pretty consistent for a pretty long time. Of course, as technology continued to move forward, they realized that some changes were needed to the policy. In 2008 is when we saw the amendment that allowed third parties who provide a specific institutional function to be able to access student data. And you can think of all the ed tech companies like Canvas. They obviously need the student data if they're going to provide all of the course information. let me think of some others. Salesforce, which is a CRM, and we use that to send text messages to students to remind them of advising appointments. So you can think of that as kind of a closed system of student data. The information is going to whatever that ed tech company is, and it's flowing right back into the university. It's not ever leaving that circle between the university and the company. And it's not just ed tech companies. A lot of universities use third parties for billing, bursar bills and things like that. It was further expanded in 2011, and this is when things started to get a little bit sticky because they expanded a number of definitions, which I don't have written down here because I didn't want the whole page to be covered in text, but they expanded some definitions to widen and make broader those that can have access to student data. They defined an educational program as kind of anything that's deemed an educational program. And that's important because when those programs are being assessed, it means that organizations who are conducting studies on those programs, either for the institution or other educational agencies, in order to do any kind of developing of processes or validating whether or not programs are working well, or administering predictive tests, which I'll talk about later, learning analytics, they now have access to data. Universities can say, hey, we would like you to do this research for us. Here is all of our student data, and what can you tell us? And then they expanded the authorized representatives, which we learned about in 2008, to include third parties who conduct audits and evaluations for federal and state supported education programs. Now, what's important about the 2008 and the 2011 amendments is that, well, we'll start with 2008. With 2008, universities and institutions, they do have to tell you that they are sharing your data with third parties. However, they don't have to tell you what third parties they're sharing it with. In fact, because I'm a grad student, I got an email from IU early on in the semester, and it was a whole page, and it said, here are all the disclosures we have to give you. And there was a whole list of all of these links I could click on. And one of them was the third party disclosure. And when you go to the page, it basically says, we may share your information with third parties, and that's it. So there's no way for me to know exactly what third parties my information is being shared with. In 2011, once they started bringing in the ability for outside organizations to conduct studies, they removed the need for notification or consent. So in most of these cases, we're talking about de-identified data. So your name is not attached to it. But if you know anything about de-identified data, that is not the de-identified data can be re-identified. And in fact, it can be re-identified pretty easily when it's combined with other data sets where there are overlapping points. So as I move forward and I talk about how student data is moving, you will probably have some feelings about the organization I'm going to tell you about. I have some feelings about the organization I'm going to tell you about. But really, what I'm not arguing that the organization shouldn't exist at this point in time. But what I am arguing is that we need to get back to consent and awareness. Students need to know where their information is going. And if it's going somewhere that is not required for the university, for example, you need to allow Canvas to have your data if that's the learning management system that you're using in your institution. However, we use Handshake for career services, and you can go on and apply for jobs and internships. Well, it's really built for a traditional college student. It's not built for a 40-something who went back to grad school. And so I did not want my data in Handshake. There's nothing anywhere that says that I have the right to say I don't want my data in there. However, because I work in IT and I know who handles all of that, I said, look, I don't want my data in there, and they were able to remove it. But there are a lot of things like that where they're optional services, where students still don't have a choice about whether or not their information is being sent. Okay, so the organization I'm referring to, it's called National Student Clearinghouse. You may or may not have heard of it. When I did my presentation at DEF CON, most people had never heard of it before. I'm not surprised because, quite honestly, I had never heard of it until I started doing this research, and I didn't know what their function was. And it was originally founded by professionals in higher education, and the intentions were good. They wanted to streamline student record verification. So you decide that you want to transfer to a different university, and that university wants to confirm your enrollment at your previous university. This is an easy way for them to communicate that information. And then once they kind of got that together, they really established themselves by being the organization that was willing to do all of the Title IV reporting for the Department of Education. So Title IV is schools that offer financial aid and Pell Grants. And so right now, National Student Clearinghouse holds data for 97% of university students who are enrolled at Title IV eligible degree granting institutions. So if your institution provides financial aid and Pell Grants, then chances are very high that your data lives in the National Student Clearinghouse. Now, their reported purpose is to provide help with enrollment and deferment reporting, offer degree verifications for employers, background search firms, but they allow access to 80 million records for current and former students to help with ed research and recruiting. So just think about that. All of my information from when I finished my undergraduate degree in 1998 is still in there and is still being used. Um, and another service they offer is they say they allow student access to print enrollment certificates. Really, what it is it's enrollment verification. You're able to go to their site, view your information, see if the information is correct. Some universities also use them to provide transcripts. So it may be the only place that a student can go if they want to get a copy of their official transcript. There's some unique things about National Student Clearinghouse. The first thing is they're a nonprofit. And the reason why that's important is because FERPA covered entities, and they are considered a FERPA covered entity because they hold student data, and nonprofit organizations are largely excluded from state consumer privacy legislation. So every state law that I know of at this point excludes entities that are covered by FERPA. And I think all states except for Virginia exclude nonprofits. In fact, Virginia is the only state in the US that also has a data broker law that requires enrollment. It doesn't really do much other than that. But National Student Clearinghouse is enrolled with them as a data broker, even though they wouldn't necessarily classify themselves as that. So the first thing I did when I started looking into them is I wanted to take a look at their privacy policy. I wanted to get an idea of, what they say about how they're using student data. So the first thing they tell you, their privacy policy is about 20 pages. It's a good read if you like reading privacy policies, and actually relatively short compared to some other organizations. But they say that they generally do collect information, personally identifiable information about visitors and users of their website. And the only option you have if you don't want to provide that information is to not interact with their website in any way, shape, or form. Which for some people, they can go, okay, they've got the information they've got from my institution. I'm just never going to go use their website to give them additional information. The problem is not all students have that option. If their university happens to be the university that only offers official transcripts through their website, then they have no choice but to log in and to provide additional information in order to get those transcripts. The clearinghouse also collects educational records that include both directory and non-directory information. Um, Now, I'm a little bit old school. Directory information in my day is when they threw a telephone book on your porch and you could access you could look up their address, you could look up their phone number, maybe look up their business, but that was pretty much it. But the problem is while there are some standard things that are considered directory information across most institutions, things like your email address at your university, what your major is, there are also universities also have the ability to designate other pieces of information as directory information, and that's where problems arise. So they say that directory information may be disclosed without student consent. And the language that they use actually comes directly from FERPA. So where it says on the screen here, it consists of information that is generally considered not to be harmful or an invasion of privacy if disclosed. That's a direct quote from FERPA. The problem with this is that there was a study done in 2023 looking at universities across the United States, and they found that directory information can also include things like photographs from your student ID card, your gender, your primary spoken language, which if we think about the climate right now, um, I know that information that IU was sending to some vendors, and we have now removed it, was whether or not a student was an international student. So there's a lot of other information beyond just information that might be needed to contact you. Now, if the information they have is found to be erroneous in some way, they will not correct it for you. You have to go back to your degree granting institution and you have to request that they correct it, and then that will get funneled back to National Student Clearinghouse. And we'll see some of the downstream effects of that. Okay, so I had to take one for the team. I really wanted to know what their enrollment verification looked like. So I went in to verify my data from my undergraduate degree. And when I went to do that, their terms of service popped up. And I copied down what it says because there's no way to download it. And so it says this is if you're going in and you're saying, I want to see a student's past, current, and future enrollment at a specified university. The people who can do that, the student obviously who's trying to self-verify their information can access it. But there are other organizations that can also access, like organizations that provide products or services based on an individual's status as an enrolled student. Well, products and services is pretty broad. That could be anything from they want you to get a credit card with them to they want you to come rent an apartment in their apartment building. It could include any number of things. Employers who are looking to verify a professional certification or dates of attendance, current enrollment, lenders, loan servicers, and guarantee agencies can access the information, and then state, local, and educational authorities. Now, what I don't know, since obviously I was looking to verify as myself, so I said I wanted to self-verify and went from there. I don't know what proof an external person has to provide to show that they are, for example, a lender? Do they just have to put in their information? Is there some license number that needs to be included? I don't know exactly what it is that they have to provide in order for the system to deem them eligible to access that enrollment data. So I've included here what my part of my enrollment verification looked like. It actually included all of my semesters that I was registered, how many credit hours I took every semester. But you can see here, it has my degree. My undergraduate degree is in education. I got it from IU Bloomington. I was a speech communication and theater education student. My minor in English isn't on here, but so I was able to get this. I was also able to see, because I'm currently enrolled at the same campus for this master's degree, I did another master's at another campus. Um, it also showed all of my enrollment related to my MS degree, how many credits, and whether or not I was considered part-time or full-time at any given time, which is important for financial aid. It's also important when you do your taxes in terms of verification. Okay, so we get an idea here of just this initial road that the student data takes. It's being sent directly from potentially your institution. And it is shared willingly with the National Student Clearinghouse. And then from there, the most common people to access that information are the background search firms, hiring managers, financial aid providers. We've got the state and local educational authorities. But then the data is also used by National Student Clearinghouse to put together learning analytics, as well as graduation analytics, all kinds of data analytics related to your institution and other institutions. And all of that data is packaged and sold back to universities. For example, I know someone who is a director of admissions in a particular school, and they actually buy data about specific students who were admitted to the university and were directly admitted to that school, but who decided not to come to Indiana University because they want to know, where did they go instead? And they use that information when they're recruiting and they're looking at next year. Um, Data and learning analytics, it's also used to track four-year graduation rates. They will track it based on gender, based on income, based on a whole host of other identifiers, and that is packaged and sold. So even though some of the learning analytics data is de-identified, like graduation rates, they're not talking about individual students, they're looking at entire institutions. There is also identifiable data that is shared, such as the data about what school you decided to go to instead of the one that's looking up the information. So your data is moving right along there. And then in 2021, this I was not expecting. It was a happy accident that I found it. But in 2021, the National Student Clearinghouse partnered with Equifax, which is one of the largest credit reporting agencies in the country. It was a little bit ironic because when I gave my talk at DEF CON, the week before, I had just gotten my $3.76 from the Equifax breach from like 7 years ago. So I thought that was timely. But they partnered together, and National Student Clearinghouse agreed to give Equifax all available post-secondary degree information from participating clearinghouse institutions. So this is not current enrollment, but this is all, well, actually, no, it is current enrollment. I just looked that up yesterday. It does include current enrollment. Basically, anything that's on that enrollment report is being shared. All of this information is identifiable because it's not useful to Equifax if they don't know who you are. That's not meaningful information to them. And so what they've done is they've packaged this into, it's called Talent Report Education. You can go and look at it on the Equifax website. And they're specifically targeting talent professionals, headhunters, HR professionals, background screeners, and employers. That's who it's being marketed to. But those are not the only purchasers of this data. And at this point, the data is being purchased. Equifax is making money off of this data. It is also being shared with big banks. If a bank wants to decide whether or not they want to give you a loan, it's being shared with insurance companies. If an insurance company wants to decide whether or not they're going to provide car insurance to you, they can access these reports as well. And so once you add Equifax in, you start to realize that your data is going in a lot of different directions. It's going out from National Student Clearinghouse to a bunch of different entities off to the right. Then they're sending it over to Equifax, who is selling the data to a lot of other entities on the left. I could not find anywhere what the contract was between National Student Clearinghouse and Equifax. I'm really unclear what makes it possible for National Student Clearinghouse to share identifiable data with a non-FERPA covered entity. So, Equifax is covered by the CPRA, the Consumer Protection Reporting Agency. I get all the acronyms messed up in my head, but that's who they're covered by. They're not covered by FERPA. So I am unclear and continue to look into what it was that made that partnership possible even to begin with. So once you see all of the different places that your information is going, well, you want to make sure that information is correct. Because if that information isn't correct, you're in trouble. And this is where one of the first big problems comes in. If we take into account that most students that I have personally talked with have never heard of National Student Clearinghouse, I, as a student whose data has been shared 3 times over at this point, was not aware that National Student Clearinghouse existed. Most students aren't even going to know that that's someplace they need to go to check to make sure that their data is correct. So when I decided that I wanted to verify my data, I went onto their website and I had to pay $13 per institution, which is why I only got my undergrad records and not my other graduate school records, because I didn't want to pay another $13. But students do have to pay just to be able to look at the information that the clearinghouse has on them. If they find that something's wrong, they have to go back to their institution and say, hey, this information is wrong, provide whatever evidence it is they need to provide, talk to whomever it is that they need to talk to in order to get that corrected. Once it's corrected, then in the batch process that sends that university's data back to National Student Clearinghouse, we'll send the corrected data. The problem with this is that during the period of time where that data is incorrect, it's still moving out of National Student Clearinghouse. It's still going to Equifax. It's still being shared with and sold to. It's being used as a part of data analytics. And students don't know once it's leaving there, where else has it gone? So you've corrected your information with your institution. You check back with NSC, your information is correct there, but how many other entities have incorrect information that they're going to make decisions on because it was passed to them before the correction was made? So that's the first big problem. And that leads to some other pretty significant issues. The one I focus in on is the financial impact. And there's been a lot of controversy over how NSC is classified. But regulators have found that reports that included faulty information, they were used by student loan companies to make decisions on millions of borrowers' accounts. And when those reports have errors, it can lead to higher loan costs. It can cause delinquency, default, loss of student loan benefits. This was seen during the pandemic, not with National Student Clearinghouse, because this is an issue really with all data brokers. It doesn't matter whether it's a nonprofit data broker or a commercial data broker. During the pandemic, the CARES Act was passed. That put a pause on all of, everyone's student loans. They didn't need to make payments. They weren't going to accrue interest. Unfortunately, when the CARES Act went into place, there were some servicers that were not marking their information correctly. So there actually is still a lawsuit. It is still pending. It has not been settled and no decision has been made, called SAS et al. Versus Great Lakes et al. So that Great Lakes et al. Is Great Lakes Education Loan Services. Their student loan company, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, and Vantage Score Solutions. All of them were passing along this incorrect data. And as a result, I think it was 4 million students files were marked as their loans being deferred, not paused. And that meant that they were still accruing interest. And accruing interest, and there was the expectation that after the first period of time that they would start paying again. So what ended up happening is students weren't paying because, the CARES Act kept getting extended, but for some students, it didn't look like it was extended. And so credit scores were going down. And students didn't realize this until they tried to get additional financial aid, until they tried to get a mortgage on a house or tried to get a loan for a car. It was only then that they realized that this faulty data was out there. And so the SAS et al., this is a class action lawsuit with plaintiffs who were affected by this. The other thing that's possible is an error can go through. The error may be, I don't want to say small, because any error that causes additional financial burden is not small, but a small enough error that the student doesn't realize that they're accruing more interest or fees that they shouldn't be accruing. So by the time they graduate and it's time to start paying off these loans, their loans can be thousands of dollars more than they should have been because of that additional interest and fees that are now lost in some statement from 2.5 years ago that nobody would ever think to look back to. So it's pretty important that the data that's being passed on about you is correct. And that's part of the reason why the three main credit reporting agencies, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, allow you one free credit report each year so that you can go in, you can take a look at your credit report. If something looks incorrect, you can report that and get that remedied. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. And one of the arguments in another lawsuit, this was back in 2019, this was a class action lawsuit in the state of Massachusetts, Robinson v. National Student Clearinghouse. And again, it was a class action with, I think, maybe 60 students or maybe more. I think 60 filed. There were many more students who received payment from the settlement. But at the time in 2019, NSC was charging $30 to verify your information, whereas credit reporting agencies under the CPRA were not allowed to charge more than $15.50 for you to access your credit report. And that was beyond the one free one you get per year. You don't get one free one with NSC. You always have to pay. And the NSC provides information to loan servicers. And so do Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And so people started to question, why aren't they classified as a credit reporting agency? If they're providing financial information to loan servicers, to banks, to other people who are looking to potentially extend, money to an individual, why aren't they also covered by the laws that cover credit reporting agencies? And that's a question that was never really answered, but it's an argument that's still being made. What ultimately happened in this class action suit is it was settled. It was settled, I think, for $16 million. So I think everybody made back maybe $10 on what they on what they paid for their credit reports. But as a part of that settlement, they had to agree that they would never charge more than the limit that credit reporting agencies can charge for your credit report. So now they are limited to charging no more than $15.50. And it's interesting because if you initially go on and you look at where you can click on to check your enrollment, it says that it's $19.99. And it's only once you say that you're self-verifying that the price drops down to 13. So for the loan servicers, for the people who want to sell you things, who are going in there to get this information, they're paying $19.99 per person to access the enrollment information. So you can imagine how much money that is that they're spending on your information. So where am I headed next? This research is definitely not over. I said I was at a conference last week. It was basically a privacy policy and privacy law conference. And I connected with a woman on LinkedIn. Her name is Heidi Sass, Saas. And she is an attorney. She's an attorney who hates data brokers. And if you go to her LinkedIn page, she says that right in her profile that she hates data brokers. She specifically goes after ed tech companies who are collecting or misusing student data for students K through 12. Um, it just so happens that National Student Clearinghouse, they also hold data on 90% of high school students in the country. So they don't just have university students' information. So she represents uh, clients who have been harmed by their students' data or who discover that their students' data is being used in a way that it shouldn't be used. One thing I'm sure many of you heard about the 16-year-old young man who committed suicide after talking with ChatGPT. And if you haven't, it's a very, very sad case that you can look up later on. But ChatGPT wanted to subpoena every student who was at that student's memorial service. Well, what's the purpose of that? You know, what is subpoenaing all these students who are struggling because they've lost somebody that they care about, they've lost a fellow student? How does bringing them into court, one, help ChatGPT's case in any way, and what impact does that have on the students? So she was working with the families of those students to fight that. If you are interested in student data privacy K through 12, I highly recommend connecting with her on LinkedIn. I met her last week. She is hell on wheels, and she wouldn't mind me saying that. Because she is there to challenge, and if she sees something wrong, she's not going to be quiet about it. She was specifically at the conference that I was at last week in order to make sure that everybody was being truthful about the information that they were sharing. She also happened to know that there was an FTC people's hearing going on down the street, so I got to sit in on a hearing with two FTC commissioners, which is pretty interesting. So my question is going forward, well, really, there are two questions. I was just recently given the article that I've posted here. I've not downloaded the entire thing yet because it costs $40. I am going to download it when I start working on my next section of research. But this study was done talking with 100 students at institutions around the United States about how they felt about the way that their data was being used specifically for learning analytics. A lot of students didn't know their data was being used for learning analytics. I personally have issues with learning analytics. And the reason why I do is as an academic advisor, for a very short time near the end of my time advising, we had I'm not going to name who they are, but we had a particular company that part of the services that they provided was learning analytics along with advising services. And so when you looked a student up, you could choose from all of the different majors that IU had to offer, and it would give me, as an advisor, the percentage likelihood that that student would be successful in that major. And I have a big problem with that because during my time advising, I advised students who got perfect scores on their SATs and flunked out in their first semester because they never learned how to study. And I advise students who were first generation college students who had to take their finite math class twice before they got a high enough grade, who worked so incredibly hard that they made their success in the major that they wanted to go into. And neither of those are true for all students in those categories. And that's kind of the point. You can't make a sweeping statement about a particular student based on a particular SAT or ACT score or a particular grade in a class. And by directing them to do that, you're potentially negatively impacting their entire college journey because they're not doing what they really want to do. So learning analytics is collecting all of that information. It's collecting information on every student who ever took finite math, what grade they got in finite math, what SAT scores they had, what ACT scores they had, how high a math did they go through in high school, what was their grade in high school math. All of that information is going in, and it's then spitting out predictions for students. Um, I have less of an issue when it's looking at overall institutional, what are the graduation rates at a particular institution? How many students graduate in 4 years versus 6 years? But when they're using individual student data to make recommendations to other students, I have an issue with that. And a lot of other students from the abstract of this paper also have an issue with that. And they don't know that their information is being used this way. So I'd like to do some more research to look into students' perceptions of how their data is used. Data analytics and learning analytics, they're not just done by external entities like National Student Clearinghouse, they're also done in-house using Tableau reports and other mechanisms for tracking information. And data analytics have become huge. In everything that I work on in terms of academic advising technology and student success technology, the first thing that our users want to know is can we build a report on this? Can I see a report? It's all about being able to see everything on paper. So that's one thing, one direction I want to go. But the second direction is this, is where is the room for consent? Because it seems like the opportunities to consent to the use of your data have become smaller and smaller and smaller over time. Do I expect Indiana University to tell me every single third party entity that they contract with for every service that they use them for? No, that's ridiculous. There's no way they could do that. I wouldn't be surprised if there were close to 100 different third parties doing all different kinds of things. But I do expect that if my data is being given to someone that it doesn't need to be given to, I want the ability to say, yes, I want that entity to have this information, or no, I don't want this entity to have that information. Handshake. No, I don't want them to have my information. I'm not going to use their career services. I would rather do my career searching on my own, and I don't want my information being put into that platform. That is a non-essential function. My information is being sent to National Student Clearinghouse. In some ways, I don't have a choice about that because they do all of the Title IV reporting to the Department of Education for as long as we have a Department of Education. So my data has to be used for that purpose, but it doesn't have to be used in the other ways that it's used. It doesn't have to be passed on to loan servicers. It doesn't have to be passed on to credit card companies who see I just graduated and they want to try to get me to sign up for their credit card. And so I believe that there should be um, pieces, non-essential pieces that we can consent to, that we can determine how we want that information to be used. Because it seems like FERPA, which was originally written to protect student data, um, has now just continued with each amendment to allow more and more people to access student data. One kind of aside note from the 2011 amendments, 2011 amendments allow student workers to access student data if they're, have a work study job or have a job with a particular department. It is permissible under FERPA, provided they've completed the FERPA training, to have access to other student information. I personally don't think that's necessary. And in fact, there have been situations where information has been screenshotted by a student to share with another student because they happen to know that particular student. There are a lot of stories like that that have floated around among people that I've spoken with. So there are a lot of issues with that as well. But what it all boils down to is students should have more control over how their information is being used. They should know where their information is going so that when there is an error, they know where to go to fix that error. And right now, that just isn't happening. Some other concerns that I have, but I cannot say 100% whether they're founded or not. And I say that because as the information is being shared between Equifax and these other entities that they're selling data to, and I'm talking specifically about the identifiable data, I don't know what those contracts look like. I don't know how those other entities are allowed to use that data. Are they bundling it and reselling it in other ways? I don't know. So that's something to potentially be concerned about, but we need more research and more information, really just to know where it's going from there. So I've said a lot, and I will admit it's a little bit strange, essentially talking to my computer screen and not being able to see anyone. But I certainly do want to answer questions. If anybody has thoughts, things they want to share, I included my LinkedIn on here. I'm happy to connect with anyone after this. I included both of my email addresses only because while I am currently an IU student and I do currently work for IU, when I graduate in May, I am going to be looking for positions in privacy policy and compliance, either in higher ed or healthcare. And so there's always a chance that that email will no longer work. So I included my personal email as well.